Hi everybody, and welcome to our very first group critique in observational drawing. And my name is Christine, and typically I will be always holding the group critique the day after an assignment deadline, and unless something comes up and I'll let you know either by email or announcements, but I really like to just get in the day after so you always have a rough idea of when I'm going to post feedback to your assignment. Um, and this is the very first drawing we're doing in class. Mm, it's called a modified blind contour drawing, and some people actually call it just a blind contour. In terms of the instructions, it's actually pretty similar. So if you've done a blind contour drawing before, or a modified blind contour drawing, that it's going to be the same thing. And it's a really, I think, as I mentioned in my introductory notes, it's a pretty interesting and different assignment that I think takes a little bit of adjustment to really just get into the hang of it. And why do we do it? Why do we do something that seems so different in terms of the drawing style? It's because somehow I'm not able to enlarge this, but it's this particular drawing style, which I have to say I think creates some of the most beautiful drawings that I see in this class. This first drawing, it's amazing. I think there's just a wonderful beauty in these drawings because they're so much based on just letting go of expectations about how things look. You know, this particular one here, this actually looks a lot closer, I think, more realistic than a lot of times these particular drawings look like. So if yours doesn't look as realistic, it's a little bit more like, you know, things kind of can move off in different directions. Like sometimes the fingers change positions. That's all okay, as long as you're following the instructions for creating this drawing, like drawing really slow, like we call like you're creeping along like the edge of, let's say you're drawing this side of your wrist, you're actually creeping along, just slowly inching along. It can take you like 15, 20 minutes to do, or maybe longer to do a drawing like this because you're so slowed down. And what you're trying to really do, so this is really the key here, is that you're allowing your brain and your hand to start linking together. You know, like when you look at something, you look at it, your eye sees it, you put your pencil on the paper, and you spend more time looking at the object and tracing those lines, and you're actually starting to make a connection between your hand and the object, or whatever that is, whatever you're observing out there in the world. So that's really the whole kind of thing. And I think it does other kind of interesting things to the brain as well. Um, This particular drawing style came out of research in the 1980s by a woman who was very interested in the brain and in drawing, and she developed this whole technique which is used across the world today. Uh, and one of her exercises was this particular drawing style. So I think it kind of in a way unlocks also kind of creative potential. And I had a drawing instructor, or actually no, I'm sorry, she was an interior design instructor when I was in interior design school, who before she started designing interiors would actually sit down and do this drawing because she felt like it got her into a different part of her brain. So I just think they're kind of magical. Okay, so essentially, really, you can't really go wrong with this drawing unless you don't actually follow the directions, which it's very easy not to follow the directions. I think we have a natural resistance to that. But you want, you know, you want your pencil to be on the page the entire time. Like maybe you'd lift it up if it falls off the side, like which can happen because you're not really looking at your paper, and so it might fall off the edge, and then you just kind of bring it back, you put it down where you know you were before, and you just keep going again looking at your object. So we kind of want to think about this line as being something that we could in a way like string out like a piece of string or spaghetti. Like it should just be as continuous as possible, one long line. So if you have to like jump from one place to another, you could jump across or you could go back, but you kind of want to keep it all together as one line. And again, sometimes there's a few gaps here and there, but generally speaking, you want to have very slow, long, um, not necessarily long, but slow, continuous line forms. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at today, and I might ask you to give it another shot, which is good. It's good to do these as many times as possible. And we'll also probably take a look at presentation today. And by presentation, that is where we photograph the drawing and try to, turn it into a digital format that is as close to the original drawing as possible. It's a little bit of an art form, you could say, like photographing your drawing and making it and digitizing it. So there are two different videos here, if you haven't yet seen them, how to photograph artwork and how to format images, and you can use both of these videos throughout the class. But in general, in week one, I tend to focus on this particular aspect because I think, again, there is certain challenges to it. But once you've figured out a method where you've got, your whatever camera you're using or scanner, whatever it is, and you kind of figure out how to maybe adjust it in Photoshop, or if you don't have to use Photoshop, there's other kind of free editing software out there that you can use instead. But whatever you're using, you kind of get your method down, and then once you have it down, you'll just be able to use that method for the rest of your class. And again, it's actually kind of a cool skill to have. So not only are we doing drawing, but we're also learning how to photograph our artwork. Okay, all right, well that's enough of an introduction, and let's get started, seeing what people have been working on. Hey, Courtney, so it's interesting with these drawings, I can really tell when students have really followed the process, just because I think that, we can sort of tell when somebody's really hasn't really been looking at the paper very much, they've been going kind of slow. And there's also kind of a quality of the line, I think, that gets a little bit sort of kind of like jiggly, or I don't know, you know what I mean? It sort of stops and starts and changes direction. But it kind of comes across, and I think yours really does that really, really well. It looks to me like you really followed the drawing, and really, really interesting. Yeah, again, I can sort of tell it's a hand holding something, and that's okay. It doesn't matter if it doesn't actually look like the thing that you drew. Again, it's more important that this is all about process, which is not the end result, but the process. So I think this looks good to me. I don't think you need to make any changes to it. Now, if you want to, and this is true for anybody, if you want to do some more of these and submit them for the final submission, I would happily accept more drawings from you. So if you want to sit down and do another few of these, you're just kind of sitting around, you just kind of want to spend some time just exploring this further. I think you mentioned that. Just go right ahead, and then in the final submission, submit more than one drawing, if you like. Okay, but really nice job here. Oh, and finally, I'll just say, just finish up as well, I think your presentation of your drawing looks good in the sense that it looks clear, it looks like you have, it's in focus, the color of the paper and the drawing is clear, and looks fairly accurate to your original drawing, and you've also, really nicely cropped it in Photoshop, so that looks good too. Here, yeah, so you had a little trouble with your drawing. I think the photographing looks pretty good. It looks in focus. I like the way you've cropped it. The only thing I would say here is maybe you could, it looks a bit yellow, the paper. That happens, the reason why that happens, you'll notice that throughout our critique today that a lot of the drawings look a little yellow or orangey yellow. That's because the lighting in our homes is often yellowish, and you can really start picking it up in a photograph. It's easy to fix though, so we're in Photoshop. I opened your drawing in Photoshop. Let me just move my viewing screen here just a minute. So in Photoshop, you can just go up to the top menu and go to Images and go to Adjustments and just go down here to Black and White. I think that the video tutorial might do it a slightly different way. This is just my own method. There's always a lot of different ways to do things in Photoshop. But so there, now it's suddenly black and white. We could also, another thing I sometimes like to do is go back to image and do maybe auto contrast. And sometimes that can just clarify it as a little bit, like kind of give you more contrast so that you can see the white of the paper and the lines a little bit more. So you can give that a try. I think this looks a lot better. Let me just refocus our screen. Okay, and yeah, and thank you for letting me demonstrate that on your drawing. I think that hopefully that will be useful to some other folks as well. So I would say in your drawing, it looks to me like you're starting to slow down, which is great. I can sort of see that you're really starting to look at your subject, which is a hand holding a brush. And I would just say maybe, try to not do too much. We want to avoid any shading like shading things in or quick brush strokes, just go with really long, like single lines, like a continuous line. This week we're really exploring a little bit more with line, especially this drawing. So just kind of, and make sure to kind of keep it continuous so that you're not going to, continuous means don't lift your pencil up off the page, and just focus on edges, lines. You can go like do what you're doing in here, which is you can go inside the hand into like the lines in your hand, but keep it continuous. Make sure to spend more time looking at the page than looking at your, um, your object or your hand. So just give this another try and keep practicing it, and don't be afraid to do it a few times until you feel you get the hang of it, and you start seeing how you really just want to, you can start noticing when it's working is because your brain, you'll feel it in your brain shifting a little bit, where you start seeing things a little bit more clearly. Slowing down becomes a little bit more comfortable. A lot of times it's hard for us to go from fast ways of looking and doing things to slowing down. So, just, yeah, think of it as a form of meditation. I think that's in a way what it is, but in what we're meditating on is, our hands and the objects rather than the drawing page. So it's just kind of a shift in our focus. All right, well, uh, good start here and keep practicing. Yeah, Tyrone, I like what you said here. I think you mentioned that you found it very different, but it was interesting. Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it. It's different and it's interesting. If you need to, I think one of the interesting things for me about this drawing is you do need to have a little bit of an open mind and a willingness to try something new. If you don't have that capacity, then first of all, drawing is very difficult, but this type of drawing in general, I think, is different, but certainly this exercise can be challenging. So it's good to just kind of let go and, become willing to do the drawing, which is the very first step. So I am going to go up here and do exactly what I did with Kiara's, which I'm going to just turn this into black and white, and also maybe do the auto contrast on it, so it kind of gets a little more in focus or a little bit clearer. Yeah, this is looking pretty good. Um, I would say maybe slow down a tiny bit more, so it looks like you've been sketching a little bit in here. You want to avoid any kind of like sort of sketching quickly and make it more slow and deliberate. Just like Courtney's, the very first one. Slow it down. Just kind of what we used to do when we were learning this is we would just set a timer for 15 minutes and draw until the time ran out, because that way you're not looking to finish the drawing exactly, you're just waiting for the timer to go off, and so it doesn't really matter how much you've even drawn in 15 minutes, so you can really slow down. So that's a good trick. But that's all I think you really need to do here is just slow down a little bit more. I think this is actually quite a pretty drawing, really interesting drawing already, but just to bring it a little bit more into the process of the modified blind contour. And then when you're photographing it, just watch that you're not photographing it at an angle. Let me see if I can zoom out here a little bit. You can see it's a little bit angled here. If you can get a little more straight on so that it's square, the edges are square, then you can come into Photoshop and crop it, just like those tutorials talk about. So you might take a look at those tutorials again, and just work on your presentation just a little bit more. Hey, Janelle, all right, so I actually just color corrected your drawing using the steps I did before. So hopefully you got a chance to follow along with those and can give those a try. And then I'm going to do one final step here just to demonstrate this step as well, which is I'm going to crop. Let me just get my Photoshop a little bit better. There we go. I'm also going to crop this, if you don't mind. I'm going to demonstrate how to do that on your drawing, and it's really easy. You just go into the toolbar here in Photoshop and find the crop tool, and then the crop tool allows you to crop your drawing and take off any unnecessary background that is still showing in your drawing after you photographed it. It's really hard not to have that happen because our cameras, the kind of the ratios, proportions of the camera screen may not be the same as your drawing, so I think everybody, and I missed a little bit there, but you can always kind of go back and recrop it again. Oops. Let's just do that. There we go. Okay. Okay, so in your drawing, I'm just zooming in a little bit so I can see your lines. I think this drawing looks really, it's a really beautiful drawing. It's really got a lot of line work in it and a lot of detail. And I would say for yours too, this would be a really almost in a way starting to become, it's not quite gesture drawing, but it's starting to become a little gestural, which is the next drawing style that we're doing, where kind of like there's quick strokes in it, and it's a really beautiful style of drawing that we're going to explore too. So, so I would just say for this particular drawing, what you want to do is maybe just slow down a little bit more. I can tell some of the lines are slower in places, and then you maybe sped up a little bit. Think about just one single line rather than multiple lines that define edges. So one single line, and it's all going to join up, like again, pulling one long yarn, ball of yarn. If you pull it all out, that's how your pencil line should look. As close as you can. Again, as I mentioned before, sometimes your pencil drops off the page and you do have gaps, but in general, the closer you can do that, the closer you'll have to a true blind contour drawing. Okay, yeah, look at the page, set a timer if you want. I don't, it looks like you actually have a lot of time and effort in this drawing, so I don't think that's something you need to worry about, but just, again, slow it down, work with the single line. Hey, Daniel, all right, so I think your presentation looks pretty good. The only thing that I did here is I just did those two steps that, I did earlier. Just I turned it into black and white and I did the auto contrast just to give the lines a little more definition, so you can give that a try with your drawings. And yeah, I love the idea of holding a coin. I think you've got you've worked with line here, which is great. It's all about line. So I would just say that, and you also have a fairly continuous line, which is great. So I would just say, work a little bit more on more lines, in as many lines as you can, your fingernails, your knuckles, all the kind of little lines you see. You don't have to, um, limit yourself to any particular lines, just whatever you see. And then also just kind of make sure you're looking, directly at the paper. I'm sorry, your hand as you do it. Slow down, one continuous line, so you kind of, as you move along, you don't necessarily have to go back over that line again to make multiple lines. It really doesn't, as long as it's just a single line, as your eye, you want your eye to be crawling along those edges. So it doesn't matter how your drawing turns out, but how your drawing turns out shows the process of how you did the drawing, if that makes sense. So as long as you just kind of look at your hand and the object, go slowly along the edges, you can, as you're going along, if you want to take a detour and go in here and let's say do some interior lines on your hand, you can do that, and then you can sort of come back to the edge, continue along here, go in here. It doesn't matter if any of those edges line up anymore, that your hand doesn't, look this, at all like the way it does in real life. It's more just about that process. Dana, in yours, the only thing that I did in your drawing is I just did the black and white step that we did earlier. And otherwise, I think your presentation looks really good in terms of your documenting of your drawing. So let's just zoom in here a little bit. And yes, it's good to remind yourself that this is all about process. And it's so hard for us to let go of end result. We've been trained through, our lives to focus on that. Except for when we're kids, we're allowed to kind of, a lot of us, could just play and not have like an outcome in mind. But then we get sort of trained into thinking that there has to be a result. We have to do something that has an end goal. And the end goal is the process. It is just the process. So yours, I think you've got some good lines in here. I love what's happening in here. That really shows that you're working kind of continuously. And I might just say keep working a little bit more, maybe a little bit more on the lines, like find more lines if you can. You know, make sure that you're going in a continuous line. But I think you're moving in the right direction here. So just kind of keep finding more details. Make sure sometimes I think it's also our pencils can get a little dull, and so the lines get a little bit thicker, which there's nothing wrong with that either. But if you need to sharpen your pencil, even as you're going along, if you notice it becomes dull, it's okay to go and sharpen your pencil and come back and put it back on the paper and then keep looking at your hand and your object and keep working that way. Okay, yeah, so I'd keep practicing. Aaron, yeah, what you said really resonated, that it's so true, isn't it, that when we draw something, we're always trying to look at the paper more than we are looking at the thing itself. And it's ironic how that's actually the thing that gets us into trouble in drawing. Observational drawing. Now, there's all kinds of different drawing styles. Like, you can draw without having anything in front of you in terms of, you're not drawing necessarily from life. You're just drawing from your memory. And that's a whole different thing. But in observational drawing, it is interesting how that's really our biggest stumbling block, is that we look more at the paper, like we try to find the answers in the paper, which is in our mind rather than what's out there, in the world. So I actually think this is a really pretty drawing too. You've got some really nice line work in here. It's not quite blind contour yet, in the sense that you've got quite a lot of sketching, where you're doing a lot of sketching, which again is really more of just a different style of drawing. It's actually a little more gestural, where you're trying to find the edge. So yeah, I would just say, try to, in a way, what's also a good trick for this particular assignment is to not even think of it as drawing. Like, you can sort of think of it as some kind of like other kind of exercise, like however you want, like whether it's like, if you like working out, it's like you're lifting weights, or, whatever it is, some kind of other task. Because I think then that can kind of detach from what we normally think of as drawing. So I would just slow down a little bit. I love your object, and just kind of make sure you're working with a continuous line, and just the cross contours really like you've done, but just kind of thinking more of looking at the object and keeping that continuous line. Oh, and I didn't mention, so I'm just looking at this in Bridge, but I think your drawing, I think all you'd need to do is color correct it, turning it to black and white. I think that otherwise, I think it's well photographed. It's just picking up the kind of the yellows of the lighting. Um, okay. Okay, Taylor, actually, so very similar to what I just mentioned to Aaron, which is that this is a very nice drawing, but it's a little bit more gestural than blind contour drawing. So just really the same advice that I gave Aaron, which is just, slow down, make sure you're looking at your object, uh, you know, maybe you sneak a peek every once in a while in your drawing. It's hard for us to resist that, but keep most of your attention on your object in your hand, and just make sure to work on the continuous line as you work, all the way through. And whenever you need to, you go inside into cross contours. It doesn't matter where you come back to an edge. It's all about just following that process. I think your presentation overall looks really good. Your color, you've got a few shadows in here, but it's pretty good, I think. I always get shadows on my drawing. I seem to not notice them, so sometimes you can, be aware that might happen. But otherwise, I think whatever you're doing to photograph this looks really good. Giovanna, yeah. So you mentioned that you're not really good at hands. Hands are one of the harder things to draw. So isn't it interesting how on our very first drawing, we're actually drawing what is one of the hands are very difficult, even for professional artists, just because we have so many different ways to move our hands and so many different kind of details within them. But the interesting thing about this drawing is that if you do the process of just looking at the hand, watching the lines, moving your pencil along with the lines, it doesn't matter how hard or how easy your subject is. If it's something really simple to draw, that's okay. If it's something really hard to draw, that's okay, because the end result doesn't matter. It's really about just that coordination of your eye and the edges of what you're drawing, what you're looking at. So I would just encourage you to slow down with your drawing, take it really slow, read through the instructions again, for the assignment and follow along the edge, just moving your pencil as slow as possible. You can kind of move it like I'm doing, just like in little darts, and then following each line with your eye, just letting the pencil follow along like you're a machine and you're just inscribing based on the information your eye receives. Um, one continuous line. That's all you really need to do. Just follow those and don't worry about the results. Um, and then when you're photographing, follow I would take a look at the video tutorials that we looked at the very beginning in the assignment directions for how to photograph and how to Photoshop your drawing. Just, use those as a guide. They really are very useful, and you'll be able to, once you learn the technique of photographing your drawing, making sure it's straight, not at an angle, then I think you'll be able to just use that method for the rest of your drawings in the class. Okay, everybody, thanks for getting started. I know, takes a lot of bravery to draw. It's not the easiest thing. I always think, doing software stuff in software is it's just sort of, drawing is really, I think, a very personal, individual thing, and it also means we've got to get paper and pencils and really spend time with it. So I really thank you all for the efforts you're making so far, and keep it up.